Fintech was all about education. I'm very honored to have this group over here, and thank you for taking our invitation to come there. Always contribute to, and she has some report here later on. You know, you put it over there. You can discuss about that. Thank you very much. And John, please, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sydney. And first of all, why don't we have a big hand for our previous speakers, Jonathan and Jacob and Howard and Andy. Weren't they great? I've already learned so much. It's been so good. Folks, what an exciting time to be alive, isn't it? It is the greatest moment in human history. I started my career in the early days of the internet. I worked for a publishing company called Ziff Davis, and this was the company that used to publish the computer magazines like PC Magazine. And magazines, by the way, for the younger folks, were these stacks of paper that were still sold in these things called bookstores. And so I was right there in the internet revolution when it happened at a technology publishing company. And I think back on it as the most exciting, most innovative, most fun time of my career. And I never thought that I would be lucky enough to have a second chance at it. But if anything, the blockchain revolution is even more fun and more exciting and more innovative than the original internet revolution. And I ask people who were around back in that time, and I say, where are we right now? Are we at like 1995, 1996? Where are we? And most people say, we're like at 95, 96, like the Netscape era. We're kind of right there. But everyone agrees it's moving so much faster. It's moving so much faster. And so now is the time. So you are in the right place today. So today I publish this website called Bitcoin Market Journal, and we have these manifestos that are on your table. One side is Ico Manifesto for investors, and the other side is Ico Manifesto for founders. So this tells you if you want to launch an ICO, how much money you need, best practices. We've analyzed almost 1,000 ICOs. We also tell you from an investor standpoint what to look for in good ICOs. We also have this amazing academic paper that Sydney just referred to called Crowdfunding Meets Blockchain by our own Navroop Sadev, who just published this. This is a premiere here at this event, so we will hand these out to you as well. So take advantage of all this great information. Now I have the most amazing panel here today, and starting to my left here, is Nina Nichols. So Nina is the founder of the Global Women in Blockchain International Organization to promote women leadership in blockchain. They do meetups, they do events. And she's also, I kind of think of you as the town mayor of the Denver blockchain scene, and really all of Colorado. That would be a governor, wouldn't it? You're like a governor. But Nina, why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you get involved with blockchain and what is so exciting about it to you?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And I echo a lot of what you say about the excitement in blockchain. It's just a great time to be involved in business. I really became involved in the blockchain community and immersed myself in the community to find out, what was going on, who the movers and shakers are, who the authentic folks are who are in this space. And in that participation, I noticed that there weren't very many women, as there aren't very many women in here today in diversity. So I wanted to launch Global Women in Blockchain and have diversity come to the forefront and make it an important scene for all of us. And now is the time for us to participate. And here we are, hashtag. And I'm excited to be a part of it, and I'm excited to be on the panel with Navroop, who's a very pronounced leader in the space.
Yeah, so getting more women in blockchain is definitely something that I'm very passionate about as well. It's super important. This is a very bro-heavy industry right now. There's a lot of dudes, high dude quotient here, shall we say. So more women in this space are definitely what are needed just for a new perspective, a new insight. Next to Nina's left is Navroop Sadev, who is a research fellow at the UCL Center for Blockchain Technologies. She's an economist by training, but she has a really deep understanding of the blockchain. She is a frequent speaker and lecturer on the blockchain circuit, and really a thought leader. So Navroop, tell us your journey for getting here and why you're excited about the blockchain.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, John and Nina, for very appreciative and kind words. So I got into the space a couple of years ago working for a Fintech startup. We're looking to build a trading platform for crowdfunded equity, starting with Reg CF and opening up to Reg A, Reg T, and eventually Reg S. So that's sort of how I got into the rabbit hole, only to realize my interest in the technology is actually way broader than that. And I think a lot of the more exciting and more impactful applications are actually beyond finance. So that's something I'm really excited about. As John mentioned, I'm a research fellow at UCL, the Center for Blockchain Technologies. We have around 100 scholars who are directly or indirectly working with distributed ledger technologies in some capacity around the world. So that is one academic network to tap onto for those of you who are interested in the space. And this is unbiased research coming from an academic institution, right? So it's not like a certain agenda we are pushing for. Also, I'm the co-author of the Hyperledger Blockchain for Business online course that sort of really opened my eyes to the more enterprise space, and I think the opportunity to bring efficiencies which are worth billions of dollars.
Thank you. And finally, Remmy Karpadito. So Remy is very interesting because he started as an entrepreneur. He started an ed tech company called Campus Tap, and raised money for it through the traditional fundraising channels, angel investors and so forth, and then has since started his own blockchain company called Espresso, which is a blockchain middleware platform, and he's currently in the middle of an ICO, so he's really seen it from both sides. So Remmy, how'd you get into this space?
No, thanks, John. Thanks for moderating, and thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be on the panel. I've been in the blockchain space for just over a year now, and my co-founder has been in the space. He was an early Bitcoin miner back in 2010, I believe. So he unfortunately spun those machines down, so that's why we're still here raising money. But I got in the space primarily through actually direct impact of kind of a culmination of events that happened through Campus Tap. The original goal of Campus Tap was to replace student identity through NFC chips in smartphones back in 2010. We had a really cool application where you could use one Samsung device, you could tap a NFC sticker and transmit data back and forth. Schools loved it, it was really impressive. However, they asked when is the iPhone going to have it. The iPhone didn't come out with the technology until 3 years later, and it wasn't until this past summer or fall that Apple unlocked the NFC API. So we were about 7 years ahead of our time. So we pivoted and moved into a mentoring platform, getting students and alumni connected. And as we scaled into more and more schools, we quickly found that a lot of the CIOs and CTOs, the colleges, wanted us to integrate with their single sign-on systems in higher education. And for us, that meant we had to spin up a separate technology or server outside of our stack and support this other framework. And we thought maybe we could improve this technology and create a student identity solution, not through hardware, but instead software using the blockchain. And as we started that project about a year ago, we quickly realized that our front-end engineering team couldn't actually participate in the development. A lot of the blockchain technology consists of new languages, whether it be Solidity or things like C++ or C#. So we ended up building a kind of bridge for them, a set of APIs and SDKs that allowed them to actually start participating in the project. And as we took a quick step back, we realized that there was a lack of infrastructure to support these type of applications today, and we pivoted into building a infrastructure middleware platform, as well as a third generation blockchain to make it easier and more approachable to get more developers into this space, which we believe is going to be one of the biggest problems as we look into the next couple of years here.
So as I've talked with many of you here, you have a lot of questions about ICOs, and Remmy is, I think, a really good resource for us as somebody who's going through this right now. And speaking of which, I think we're supposed to show this slide. So please memorize that. This is Remy's disclaimer slide. And I'm trying to get a read on the room. How many of you would say that you are ICO experts, meaning that you have actively participated in a token launch and own tokens offered in an ICO? Show of hands. I'm feeding back, rapid feedback loops. This is 10%, maybe 15%. How many of you are ICO novices, let's say, that you are familiar with them but want to learn more? Show of hands, that's another 30%. And then who didn't raise their hand? Who didn't raise their hand with either one? Those would be the beginners, the absolute beginners. Would it be helpful to kind of go through an ICO overview in 3 minutes? Show of hands? Anybody? I'm trying to get at least 50% before we go into this. I see 20, there's some. All right, I'll do it super fast. Think about an ICO as sort of the combination of a startup, an IPO, and a Kickstarter campaign. So it's like a startup because you are funding a new venture. You're sort of an angel investor in some new enterprise, and it's kind of like a Kickstarter project because you're crowdfunding this new project. Sometimes a company, not always a company, sometimes just a decentralized project. It helps to think about it like a company. And it's kind of like an initial public offering, and that you're buying shares. To be clear, you're not buying shares. You're not owning any part of a company, but you are buying a token that can be traded on exchanges, which is kind of like buying and selling tokens in a market. People ask us a lot of times, how do you actually participate in an ICO? And first of all, you do your due diligence using websites like ours. Then you usually buy Bitcoin or Ether, and then you send that to an address that they'll give you. And in exchange, you convert that into tokens that can eventually be traded on market. So people buy these tokens in the hopes that the value of them will rise either in the short term or over the long term. Now, from the founder's perspective, launching an ICO is a different matter. Because we used to just launch ICOs, and I think in the manifesto we recommend of raising about $500,000 in order to do that initial ICO. But now we're in what we call pre-ICO stage, where you go raise the funds to raise the funds. So in other words, you're going out to generally accredited investors, you're going out to friends and family, angel investors, and you're trying to do that initial raise anywhere from $500,000 to maybe even $5 million. And that's to get enough runway to then do the proper ICO. So Remmy, that's kind of the stage you guys are in right now, is this pre-ICO stage of going out and gathering that initial investment, right?
Correct.
What's it like?
Yeah.
What do you do? Tell us about it. I'm curious to hear this.
Yeah, well, you definitely, you start with your core network, and you kind of talk to a lot of friends and family to start. It's pretty much, if you want to think of this as a traditional financing, this is a seed stage investment in that sense, where the product is being built still, and you are collecting funds to build out the team and to fund the process. I think one really interesting thing, as you talk about pre-ICO and where we are today, the legal landscape is changing weekly at this point. So it's a lot of self-regulation. So one of the big things we focused on out of the gates is getting a really good legal team and iterating through that and making sure these people are staying on top of kind of what's happening in the market, and then translating that into all things marketing and communication. I think the big thing here is that, shilling and all this stuff that's happening is unfortunately creating a lot of noise in the industry, but if you're building a legitimate project and company, you can go about marketing your product and just as you would as a typical startup. That's where we kind of focus our efforts on, kind of speaking to developers. But yeah, it's a nuanced process, a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of talking to people, whether it be at conferences or directly through my network. But yeah, it's somewhat nuanced. It's a slightly, definitely different mechanism than the traditional venture route. I have spoken to a bunch of traditional venture capitalists as well for this throughout this process as well. They're not quite there, some of them, but they're very interested in the space.
Yeah, who wouldn't be? So even though this is a little bit like the Wild West and there's not a lot of official regulation, we're trying to follow best practices, and we're trying to essentially create the frameworks and guidelines to create trust in this industry. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
How many of you are in the legal profession? I talked with a lot of attorneys here already. I see 3 hands, and I know that is not right because I've talked with at least 5 of you already this morning. Okay, I understand if you're a little embarrassed by your profession, but hey, check this out. This is brand new data. The average ICO raises $12.5 million. We have analyzed almost 1,000 ICOs, I'm sorry. And we then follow up with each ICO founder to ask how much they raised. This information has never been shared, so take a picture of this and share it if you would. And you can see that the majority raised anywhere between 1 million and 25 million. How much are you guys trying to raise, Remy? Do you have any hard cap on this?
It's about 20 million.
20 million, okay, so right in the sweet spot there. And the other interesting thing here is about half go unreported. So our hypothesis on that is they were unsuccessful and they just refunded the money and do not want to talk about it anymore. But of those that are reported, about $12.5 million. The average VC Series A funding round is $5 million, by the way. So you can see why this would be so much more attractive to founders. You're not giving up any equity in your company either. Nina, I'm curious, tell me about some of the blockchain use cases that you've seen, either ICOs or just other blockchain projects, since you're so plugged into the scene in Colorado that are interesting to you.
Sure. There are many, as you can imagine. One that I find really fascinating is called Borsetta, and it is for a luxury goods line. It also involves like cultivated diamonds, cultivated gems, and uses nanotechnology to write the provenance into the gem so it can be tracked and traceable. And this goes for really any luxury good that you can think of, like if you walked into a Macy's to buy Louis Vuitton, how do you know it's really a Louis Vuitton? So I think that's a very interesting use case.
So I would buy a diamond for my wife, and I would know where that diamond has come from, and it would be traceable via the blockchain.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you would know it's not a blood diamond, which is important to a lot of people today, especially millennials.
Right.
And yeah, you would know where it was from, and the same goes for artwork. I mean, if you can think about art, you know, when what's for sale at auction, and is it real, and just having that provenance to know that it's factual and a real
Right.
gem.
And how about you, Navroop? Because you've talked and written a lot about all of the different industries that blockchain is going to radically transform. So what are some of the use cases that you get most excited about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to pick up from where Nina left here. It's not just about verifying identity or verifying the fact that a good or service is actually what the tag is on paper or what it is, but also the fact that you can actually tokenize, for example, luxury goods. Tokenize a painting. For example, we can have 1,000 tokens of a Van Gogh painting. I was just at the museum yesterday, and I was thinking about blockchain, right? And in the future, for example, if a museum wants to acquire a painting, they can crowdfund it, right, on the blockchain, for example. So provenance is definitely a huge use case, but I do feel like identity is something that really interests me, and I think is closer to humanity, if you may, right? There are millions of refugees in the world right now, and I know the UN Development Program, along with Microsoft, Accenture, and ID 2020, they are doing a pilot on providing identity solutions to these refugees, so as a piece of identity that's valid in Syria is not invalid in Germany or elsewhere in the world. So that's one use case. The other things I care about, I'm vegetarian, so I want to know that my food is, it's actually grown in a way that is sustainable and does not include, meat products. And so that's one thing where supply chain disruption is huge, right? The use case including IoT, which is at the very fundamental level, putting sensors on devices, right? On-chain can be something that's really, can be game-changing into the future. And it's a very complex use case if you think about it, because our supply chains at the moment are truly global.
So I hope you guys are all taking notes and listening carefully, because half a dozen great business ideas have already been shared with you already so far. We've heard supply chain, we've heard food, we've heard provenance, all of these great ideas, and all of these ideas are just waiting for somebody to take them and run with them. I love this idea of tokenization, that everything in the world is going to be tokenized. And I'm curious if you guys have some other examples of that. We were talking with some gentlemen over here about tokenizing real estate earlier, for example, where you could buy a fractional share of a skyscraper in Manhattan while you're living in Dubai, for example. Are there other use cases that anybody would like to share? Or shall I call on you?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I mean, I don't think everything should be tokenized. We talk to a lot of projects that are looking for, high speed and scalability transactions on the blockchain. But the first question we ask is, why do you actually need the blockchain? I think when we're talking about digital assets and tokenizing paintings or properties or whatever it may be, there's a huge, huge opportunity there in kind of changing the way we think about tangible goods and assets. But when it comes to software, the blockchain is a really interesting technology. It's also not super fast right now. So for a lot of these applications like supply chain, throughput, so on and so forth, aren't quite there. That's why I think infrastructure is so important still right now. But I think any physical property, hypothetically, could be tokenized. One thing that I think is interesting, some of my friends down here in LA, they're tokenizing sports. So they're allowing the fans to control the plays in a football game in real time via voting, and the votes are on the blockchain to authenticate and validate each vote. It's a really unique concept.
That's a crazy idea.
They're doing it for football.
The fans are calling the plays.
It's already live. They've been live for a couple of years, and now they're doing baseball is the next one.
It is a crowdsourced sports.
Yeah.
And so the team that would win would be the best crowdsourced
Yeah,
sports
have the
team.
best fan base, hopefully, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And they go all the way down to like voting on the logo and the name and the brand colors and all that stuff. So it's pretty cool. That's a different one for sure.
So I think that sort of proves, I was reading about this somewhere, that everything can be tokenized and it will be tokenized, looking into the future and speaking as an economist.
Yeah, fascinating. So, Nina, I'm curious about some of the trends you're seeing because you, in addition to the Global Women in Blockchain, you also organize the Global Blockchain Summit. And so you're in your second year now, and you have seen what's happened over the last year. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the trends and kind of what looks different this year than last year, and how should we use that to figure out where to go here?
Sure. I think one thing is that the proof of work concept is being looked at differently for more of a proof of elapsed time, which is built into the Intel, what am I trying to say, the Intel little circuit that can be used and traced amongst many, many computers. We're looking at more women and diversity, period, happening in the blockchain space, and that's one thing that we're really focusing on for the summit this year, is bringing diversity to the forefront and focusing on how we can engage women and more diversity overall to put us into the space of making money and really liberalizing all of the people out there that, like you said, the refugees and persons who don't have banking, which is, much of the economy today.
Got it. You brought up an interesting idea as well, which is just the proof of work and the chips that are being created to kind of mine a lot of the tokens. And that, for those of you who are on the investing side, is also another really interesting investing play in the traditional financial market. So I went out and bought NVIDIA stock because they're one of the folks that are generating these graphics boards that are basically being used to create a lot of this mining equipment. So there are all kinds of opportunities that you can find even in the traditional financial markets for getting into the crypto space. So that's very interesting. Hey, so Navroop, you and I recently co-authored a paper. Did you know that?
Yeah.
By the way, when we were working on that.
No, I just learned about it.
Yeah. So, and the concept was around value and how value is created in ICOs. So, how is it that we're creating value out of thin air with these ICOs and these blockchain projects? It's such a fascinating question, but give us the quick thesis.
Yeah, so, John and I were sort of fascinated with this idea that how do we value tokens, right? It's unlike any traditional assets, and we don't know yet if, the way we measure value and the way we perceive value, for that matter, for traditional assets applies to tokens or not. So we started this journey down what is now the very first paper on behavioral economics applied to valuation of tokens. And we proposed a taxonomy of tokens And finally, drawing from the work of Daniel Kahneman and Emma Stravinsky, we propose an index that you could use to value tokens, right? And the taxonomy, really, if you think about tokens, is there are essentially three kinds of tokens. The first one are those which actually represent a physical asset in the real world, if you may. And if we go by the dictionary meaning of token, a token is representation of something, right? So if this bottle is $1, and if I build a token on it, that token is worth $1. Now, if I say, I want to raise $10 million, but I will put $1 million worth of real estate as down payment, right? And let me raise $10 million, I'll build a factory on it, and then we'll sell goods, and you'll get some kind of profits from there. So that is tokens which are pegged to real assets. So that's the category number 2. But I think the most interesting aspect and the most interesting piece of the puzzle is, like John mentioned, is the tokens that are being created out of thin air. And that's sort of what made us look into the literature on cognitive psychology as to how tokens are perceived and valued. And fundamentally, we are looking at what are called the heuristics and understanding these tokens as a community vote of confidence, if you may. Is that right? Because Joan coined that term, so I don't want to take it away from him. And so looking from that, we use and modify an index of how to value startups, which can be applied to tokenization and measuring value of tokens. John, if I missed something, I'm going to let you go ahead talk about it more.
That's good. Yeah. So it's investor confidence. It's investor confidence.
Yeah,
that's
fundamentally.
what this whole $500 billion ecosystem is based on. And so for those of you who are looking to invest or to launch something in, building investor confidence. That's what we're doing here. That's why you're here right now. That is our reason for being at this moment in history, is to build investor confidence in this new asset class. A lot of people still think this is a bubble or this is speculation. It's not. We all know it's not. We all know that it's going to continue into the future. We're building that confidence right now through getting together at events like this. Remy, I just want to ask you so many questions about the ICO. Tell us something that you did really well that you're happy with, and I want to hear about a mistake you made that you would do differently at this stage in the ICO.
Yeah. I think one thing we've done well since the get-go is actually focus on the product. We had the opportunity where we were thinking about running the ICO in the summer of last year. And we could have thrown up a website and we could have raised a lot of money. But the reality is we wanted to build a real product, we wanted to build a real company. So in order to do that, you got to put in the time. And that takes some time to build a new next-gen blockchain and to build a SaaS offering middleware on top of it is not simple. It's going to take a large team, and we already have a core team working on it. But I think focusing on the product, having our marketing focused on the product has attracted developers already. And that's what our core focus is. Those are the end users, and we're getting more and more developers kind of reaching out, interested in the product and asking when they can get access to it. And that's I think, something where it's so easy to flip on the other side of the spectrum, just raise as much money as you can and then figure it out later. We've been putting in the time to kind of figure out our core demographic and market. Something I wish we did better or differently. Probably, ironically, started the fundraising process a little bit earlier. So much has happened in since last summer that the market speculation, for better for worse, has slowed down a little bit, or stricken fear into the investors, just in the sense the regulatory scene is so undefined, unfortunately. So a lot of it is education. I think I educate a lot, or have to educate a lot of the investors on the space, on the agreements, the purchase agreements, and those type of things, of what they mean, what they are. And then, in addition, just the technology is so new. So I think one thing I wish we did a little bit better, and we're starting to work on now, is continuing to kind of build up more educative content to get people up to speed on what the infrastructure is, why it's needed, what are some of the shortcomings. But It's kind of a light answer on the second half, but that's my
No,
thought
that's
is.
really
Yeah.
good. So the thing you did well was focus on the product. And again, that
Yeah.
goes back to building investor confidence that you guys actually, there's something there
Right.
at the end of the day. And you're developing the community and the documentation and all those things that come to build confidence.
Yep.
And what you would have done differently is started a little earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the deal. If you are interested in this space, now is the time. You have to get in. You cannot wait, and you cannot ask for permission. You cannot wait for somebody to tell you to do it. You just have to start doing it right now. I want to actually talk to each of you, or ask all of you to kind of talk about this idea of fat versus thin protocols. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this blog post. I'm going to just flip over to it here, which is from Union Square Ventures. I don't have it actually available, apparently. I'll describe it to you. The basic concept is that with the internet, the protocols were thin, meaning that we had free protocols like HTTP that didn't capture any of the value. All the value went to the applications that sat on top, so the Uber, the Google, the Airbnb, et cetera. And the argument is that with blockchain, the protocols are going to be very fat. So in other words, Ethereum, which is a protocol that all these ICOs are being built on top of, that's what's going to capture the value, and the application layer is going to be thin and not actually get a lot of that value. I would love to hear your thoughts, because we spend a lot of time talking about, are the better investments and the better ideas the protocols, or are they the applications that sit on top of protocols?
Sure, I'll take that
Navroop,
up.
you start.
Yeah, so I was just having a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine, and he said to me, how is blockchain changing my life? I'm not seeing anything. And my response to that was, because you're looking at it from a consumer perspective. And so I think it really depends on who's on the other side, right? The internet in the 1990s was not changing lives right away. It's changing lives now, and I took a first ride for that bird thingy here. There's an electric scooter that you can use. So that's going to be a while. But I think there's so much excitement in this space, because now is the time for thought leaders and creators to actually go and change the space. And all of this work is behind the scenes, right? The consumers are not going to see it. They don't care whether the back-end data structure is a distributed ledger or just a regular central database, right? And that's something, well, I would say you only see it when your account gets hacked, but I think it's a matter of perception. At the moment, I would potentially agree with this blog post that said that the infrastructure or the FAT protocols is going to be the bigger layer. But I think it's going to change very quickly. In fact, what we are witnessing is this leapfrogging when the basic protocols are not even there, and people are raising $30 million with a white paper to build an application. It's like, dude, how are you going to run it?
Right.
So,
But wait, I didn't get a clear answer. So the long-term value, is it going to be on the protocols, or is it going to be on the application?
it's going to be on the applications.
On the
It depends on, like I said, who's on the other side, consumer versus someone who's creating, the technologies for the future. And second, whether we're talking about 2018 or we're talking about 2025.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Nina, do you have a perspective on that? Is it the protocols or the applications that are going to?
Well, I was just thinking about governments and states and how they're using blockchain, and I think it's an integration with both the protocol and the application. Like Wyoming recently has passed a number of bills, and they're doing a lot in the blockchain space to lead, and we're seeing this happen with countries, and I think that applications will be used for all sorts of, from driver's license to voting, and I think they will be everywhere.
Yeah, so the apps eventually are going to win
Yeah.
out. And Remy, I mean, Espresso it's a middleware platform. So.
And we built our own protocol. So I think the interesting thing here is, like, Ethereum is the fat, heavy, slow protocol, relatively speaking, to today's typical database, right? And it's the first generation programmable blockchain. Just as we are in the Netscape era, Netscape is no longer around. The protocols, the core services, G Suites of the world, Oracles, MongoDB, Postgres, things that we use every day that we don't know. actually every single person in the room has used one of those services, but they don't know. Because from a consumer lens, you interface with the UI, UX, and an application layer. Those will gain the media and the attention from a day-to-day perspective, but the protocols is what's supporting every single application. The infrastructure here is going to be the most important part. I think one of the most interesting things about blockchain is that it's a foundational technology. In the sense of the internet brought, the yellow pages to a digital medium. But what came before the internet was TCP/IP, what allowed you to transmit data from one computer to another. The core protocols allow you to write to a blockchain, a core ledger that runs consensus and all these core things that make a blockchain a blockchain. And we're so early on the protocol stage that I totally agree. Like a lot of these applications, they're so exciting and theoretical. To pull so many of them off right now, you literally can't run them on Ethereum. CryptoKitties took down Ethereum. I don't think we're ready to move supply chain with 10,000 transactions per second yet. Those protocols are getting there. I also think one thing, and to talk a little bit about what we do a little bit, is that the blockchain doesn't need to store every single transaction. The blockchain's really good at cryptographically storing very pertinent data. Non-pertinent data does not need to live on the blockchain. So attributes of every CryptoKitty currently live on Ethereum, but they don't necessarily need to. That core unique ID could live on Ethereum. So it's how do you start creating this next generation development environment to support these applications? I think that's the bigger question. And I think the protocols will become lighter weight. One thing we're doing is our core ledger protocol is pretty significant, but we're looking at building a lightweight protocol that can run on a Raspberry Pi. And that's a very, low power consuming device that runs pretty much a lot of the IoT devices to some capacity. So yeah, I think the protocol for me, I think is going to be, whether we see it as a consumer, that's not necessarily going to be the case, but it's going to support all the applications. And the applications will without a doubt get all the attention, all the press and media, while the hamsters are running behind the scenes, keeping everything running. So
Or the kitties.
or the kitties. Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting super geeky. So I just want to tie it back to Jonathan's great keynote speech about CryptoKitties, because if you think about the early days of the web, when you went to conferences, it was like this. It was a lot of people talking about here it's like hashing algorithms and very technical geeky things that seem very far removed from the final product. And today, as you just said it really well, we all use those protocols in the background, but they've become invisible to us, right? They've gone away. The technology disappears when we get to a high enough level of abstraction. And that's what happened with the web very rapidly from the period from 1995 to 2000. And that's what's happening right now. And CryptoKitties, the reason I really think that this is a breakthrough and actually a huge value add to the community is because they put this super user-friendly, fun front end on the blockchain. And it really is super cute and easy, and when you just go to the site and you'll get it. You'll get it. So they're making it user-friendly and they're getting people on board on here. And they're also introducing this idea of a crypto collectible, which is a non-fungible token. That basically means that everyone is unique, and that's actually a big deal. That's a new innovation that they've introduced. So they deserve all the money that they're getting, all of it. That said, it probably will fail in about 3 years. It's going to be like a Pet Rocks, probably. But we're going to remember this day as like the CryptoKitty Day. Remember when we all talked about CryptoKitties? All right, so let me see. What time are we at? 8 minutes? Why don't we take some questions? I know you guys are really smart and have a lot of good questions. Yes, right over here.
Oh, I have two questions. First one, Remmy,
Sure.
you're talking about your technology for a non-tech person. What does your product do? Is it make, I'm guessing from what I'm hearing, it makes it easier for some company that wanted to adopt blockchain.
Yeah, there's
I'll repeat the question so everybody can hear it. It was basically, Remmy, tell us what Espresso does.
Yeah, there's two core product lines. There's the SaaS offering, which is a middleware platform. It's a library of software development kits and command line tools that developers can come in any language they want, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, you name it. They can start building blockchain apps without needing to learn things like Solidity. That is also interoperable with Ethereum and Espresso's mainnet. So the second product line is our core ledger protocol, which is a much faster proof-of-stake based consensus blockchain. The big innovation there is we have a network of side chains. So application data can start living off of the chain, and the core data can live on the chain. So those are the two core things we focus on.
Another question? Yes, in the front.
So since this whole topic is about evolution of blockchain, I wanted to hear your thoughts on how come there hasn't been much talk about quantum convention securities. We're looking at like Google coming out with the first quantum computer in 5 years, IBM, Microsoft following up in 5 years, so 10 years. How come there hasn't been much conversation about prevention on
Okay, so the question is, with all the talk of the future of blockchain, why aren't we thinking about the advent of quantum computers? Well, at which, of course, will be a quantum leap forward and could totally change the game in terms of cryptography. That's what's behind your question? Correct. Okay. Anybody want to
Yeah,
take that
I
one?
can start with that. I'm definitely not an expert on the subject, but you know, I did some reading. First of all, quantum computers are not there yet to actually be able to break really, the cryptography. It can be there, and there are only certain, stuff that it can break at the moment. But my point of view from the perspective of an economist thinking of how it will affect our larger economic structures and our interactions as economic beings is that even without the cryptography, this is huge because now we're talking about efficiencies. If I want to use the word distributed ledger technology rather than blockchain, for which cryptography is an important element, I think the savings you have just from like banks, $36 billion that have been spent by banks on compliance since the Dodd-Frank came into effect, right? You have this monstrous architecture infrastructure which is behind the scene that is a cost to the economy, to the taxpayers, and there is possibility to have near zero compliance costs because the regulators can just be one node in the network and compliance can be done real time than ex post, which is definitely the meaning of what auditing means.
And just to talk a little bit about the cryptography, cryptography is always as good as the most powerful computer at the time. So like our computers today can crush the 8-bit cryptography that existed on Super Mario, right? So everything continues to progress. Cryptography will get stronger with quantum computing as well. Quantum computers of the future could break the cryptography on the blockchain today. So that is a concern. But that's also saying that cryptography in the sense of where we are today won't evolve. So I think things will evolve. It's definitely a concern. This is a security risk. I'm not a super expert in it, but I think the cryptography will get stronger over time as well. Sure.
We're just looking at 5 years, 10 years, and we're talking about long-term investments. Banks, and I understand the majority of the banks are on cryptography and already making investments on, preparing themselves for quantum computing. My only issue is how come the blockchain community hasn't, in parallel.
So you're saying the banks are already looking forward. Why isn't the blockchain community? Yeah. We're busy. We got our hands full. We got a lot to worry about already. Did we have a question back here in the back? Yeah.
So I think all of you guys kind of agreed that applications are kind of the way forward rather than protocols. Can you talk about the, call it 1,000 protocols that launched in 2017 and where they're going to go in the next few years?
That's a good question. So all these tokens and protocols that have launched, what's going to happen to them in the future? Would anyone care to speculate or predict? Would you like to prognosticate?
Mergers
Mergers.
coming together.
A great shakeout.
Yeah,
Consolidation.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think a lot are going to disappear. These are startup companies. Most of them now run by better or worse engineers. And 2 people on a napkin within a website, the chances of them succeeding is very slim. So I think the majority of projects will fail. So that will wipe out a good amount of people. So then the good companies will prevail in the sense that I think, it's also tough to say all these are protocols. People kind of define themselves as a utility or protocol. That's changing. We're in the process of that actually changing. You can't just call yourself a utility. You can't just call yourself a protocol. If you're a security token, and leveraging token for an application, that's fine. You have to kind of claim yourself as that. So I think a lot of that definition will start happen big time this year. It's already happening. The SEC is clamping down pretty hard on it.
So if I were to answer your question, so I advise companies, and obviously I do due diligence on what they're trying to do, and all of them are like, we are a utility token, we're going to build this ecosystem and change the world. And then I ask, so how are you going to do it? And they say, we're going to do an ICO on Ethereum, which takes 72 lines of code and you can launch a token, right? And so, yeah, I agree with Remmy. A lot of these are not really basic protocols. That's a lot of it is talking, and they are trying to ride on existing blockchain platforms. And in fact, speaking from an econ perspective, there's nothing else you can do. It's what we call the platform problem. Now, if most of the users and clients are on the Ethereum blockchain, the ERC20 token, if you do not launch your token there, you would actually be leaving out the largest part of the market. So they are locked in to using that. And there are definitely a few competitors and people who are building I guess huge code bases like Hyperledger with a bunch of different platforms and frameworks and tools. But most of it is not protocol. So I think first of all is like going beyond the talk and the words and the veils around it.
It's a good question. What's going to happen to all the tokens, basically? I think that, as Remmy said, most startups fail. Most of these are going to fail. You're going to see a great shakeout. You're going to see people realizing that they gave their money to something that's not going to pan out. I think that there will be a backlash. The media will pick up on it. ICOs will be seen as the villains instead of the saviors, and there will be a bust. And then it will gradually rise again from the ashes. That's what we saw during the dot-com era. But remember that boom and bust cycle is what builds our new technologies. So it was the initial influx of capital during the dot-com days that built the Googles and Amazons of today, and it's going to be the same way. One more question. Yes, over here.
Remmy, I didn't get a chance to read your white paper yet.
Sure.
How much token did you hold back for the executive team, the founders, and for bound program?
So the question is, how many tokens did you hold back for the founding team, executive team, with the Espresso launch, which has not started yet? Let's be clear about that.
Yeah, the formal public sale is not happening, but right now. But so we are selling 51% of the tokens. We are a proof of stake-based system, so we have a decentralized governance model with voting. We're building voting into the staking wallet, as well as it's a masternode setup, so there will be a big sense of community actually driving the future of the development. 49% is left for founders, the team, R&D, treasury, and advisors. We are not doing a bounty program.
And out of curiosity, why did you choose not to do the bounty?
I feel like a lot of the bounty programs you see out there right now are a lot of it's shilling or kind of a false set of expectations. I think paying people for their work is fine, but just because you you liked us on Twitter doesn't deserve any tokens.
So to be clear, a bounty program is where when you launch an ICO, you offer out to the community to help you build your initial marketing grassroots campaign, and you give them tokens as a bonus. So they would go like you on Twitter or follow your Telegram account or what have you, and they get tokens in return.
We are talking to some developers that are helping build some software for us, which they could leverage the tokens to actually use.
And it is
development.
true, they do tend to be kind of spammy, sort of.
Right.
You don't get a lot of high-quality people doing that usually, although some grassroots campaign is necessary. Speaking of grassroots, last question, Nina, I'm just curious, since you do so much to connect the blockchain community, both with women and both in your local space, how can folks stay connected and learn more and make this scene here in LA even bigger and better? Do you have some tips or some tools for folks doing that?
I do, and thank you for that question. For women and people in diversity or concerned with diversity, you could all join globalwomeninblockchain.org. We're going to have representatives from every country to work with the local audience and connect all of the meetup groups and different groups from Girls Who Code to Women Who Move Millions. And at the same time, we're featuring and highlighting our group at the Global Blockchain Summit in Denver this April 19th and 20th, which we invite you all to come. It covers blockchain across the spectrum. It's not a particular focus. So it covers everything from ICOs to academics. I think you just have to step up and join and participate, and the time is now.
Thank you. So, and Navroop, you'll be handing out your new academic paper. Ask Navroop for this. And Remmy will be answering your questions about espresso if you have memorized his disclaimer beforehand and can recite it back. And let me see. I saw this quote yesterday. Happiness is the exercise of vital powers along lines of excellence in a life affording them scope. That's by Aristotle. The exercise of vital powers, using everything that you have along lines of excellence, being committed to excellence in everything you do in a life affording them scope, creating a life for yourself that is able to hold and contain the vision that you have for the world. That's the space that we're in right now. You have an opportunity to join us in this once-in-a-lifetime moment as we make history in this space and create a life for yourself that gives you the scope to exercise your powers along lines of excellence. That's happiness, according to Aristotle. And I can say, truthfully, it's the happiest time of my career. I think these guys would say the same. So join us. Join us. Give it up for this fantastic panel. Thank you.